Hello, I'm Karen Tumulty. I'm a columnist here at the Washington Post, and I write about politics. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning for our conversation with Senator Amy Klobuchar. Senator Klobuchar is a member of the Senate Commerce Committee and specifically on the subcommittee that deals with manufacturing. And we are really testing our technical capabilities here because she is joining us from a car in Wisconsin, where she is traveling with her fellow Senator Tammy Baldwin, campaigning for Vice President Joe Biden in the most swingy of swing states this year. So
Well,
thank
thank
you
you
for
so much. Great to be on. Thank you. And yes, I'm in the car. I am parked. That's good. So we're not going to see like moving background behind me. But yes, Tammy and I are in La Crosse actually doing an event at a farm for Vice President Biden about his rural policy. But I'm really excited to be here today because there can be nothing more important besides moving our country forward and focusing on jobs in the economy. And that really includes, in a big way, manufacturing.
well, we are here today to talk about manufacturing, but it also feels like we have had 10 years worth of news in the last 10 days. So I've got to ask you, how are you how do you see the state of the presidential race right now? And what are the Democrats' prospects right now for taking back the Senate?
Well, I think the last few days have really kind of summarized this whole year to me in so many ways. The way the president has handled what was a difficult situation. He got the virus that he claims that doesn't dominate anyone, and it in fact sent him to the hospital. And that was a moment where he could have showed leadership, and he failed. He defiantly took off his mask as he walked into the White House in front of all of America. Then the debate, I think, was another defining moment of the last 10 days, where people, at least in my state, especially in the suburban areas, people in Wisconsin, where I am today, where I think the headline, when it looked at the polls after the debate, said, were repulsed by how rude he was, how he interrupted Chris Wallace, the moderator, 145 times, and how while Joe Biden valiantly tried to put a plan forward, when it came to our economy and the pandemic, he basically just chose to engage in personal attacks. I think that was really a defining moment of the campaign. For me, it wasn't new news, and probably not for reporters who had been covering him, but it was news for some people who were tuning in to make their final decision about who they should vote for. So I think we're seeing a literally a drove of voters going to the polls, and we're seeing a widening of this race. And it should be very helpful, of course, in the US Senate, where the Republicans have chosen to ram through a Supreme Court nomination instead of focusing on this COVID relief package, which would be really helpful to our economy, including restaurants, including stages like small music venues, which matter all over, believe it or not, small towns as well as big, and including, of course, manufacturing, which is our subject today. We want to get to what I call the day after tomorrow, and that means you need a bridge to the time when a vaccine comes out and we can get our economy expanding again.
So what is the state of manufacturing, both in the immediate sense, where we have seen it hit by both a health crisis, which has really been a special risk for workers who have to work in close quarters, and also an economic crisis. What is the state of manufacturing in the immediate sense, but also in the longer term sense, where the US has really sort of lost its world dominance in manufacturing?
Yeah, and this is something that, as bad as it seems when you look at the numbers, it actually is this exciting opportunity for our country. And I think there's just this newfound belief that we need to make things in America. Some of it's out of the pandemic, where you had us not being able to get masks or protective equipment because we were so dependent on the supply chains. And at the same time, you saw a president that seemed unable to deal with the rest of the world. So here's what I think. Number one, short term. That means passing the HEROES Act, which just today I saw a tweet from one of your reporters, I believe, saying that in the Washington Post, saying that the White House is now putting a major priority on getting a COVID package done. That's news after what the president's been saying, but this is something we've been pushing for a long time. Jerome Powell, head of the Federal Reserve, making very clear that needs to get done, and that would include an extension of the PPP and some of the work that needs to be done to help manufacturing. The thing that has to happen after that, it's a lot of things, but I believe we can do this. It's seeing what's going wrong with manufacturing. Well, during the pandemic, we're down over 600,000 manufacturing jobs. But I think one of the interesting facts is that we still have jobs that are unfilled. I know that sounds a little crazy, but we don't have a connection between the skills that we have right now with our workforce and the jobs we can fill. And to me, that means free 1 and 2 year degrees. It means realizing as a country that we don't have a shortage of maybe like sports marketing degrees or MBAs. We have a shortage of construction workers. We have a shortage of plumbers. We have a shortage of people that know how to make, run, and maintain the robotics equipment that is modern day manufacturing. And we have to get more women and minorities into that field, not to mention immigration reform. So it's some unique challenges with manufacturing, but I think the answers are there. The answers are making sure that we're making things in America whenever possible, making sure we're investing in R&D, and then getting our country behind the idea that manufacturing isn't dead. I sure know it in my state. We make everything from pacemakers to Post-it notes. And our high-tech manufacturing has been a major reason Minnesota has had a stronger economy than a lot of other states over the past decade.
But even before the pandemic, though, you were also a big advocate for rethinking manufacturing and specifically for making it more eco-friendly, making it more in line with the types of things that we need to do with regard to climate change. Could you talk a little bit about that, the kinds of initiatives that you would like to see going forward?
Well, I think when we've seen the fires raging on the West Coast, we know that doing nothing about climate change and doing nothing about green jobs is a huge mistake because it's only going to get worse. And it's everything the military predicted 10 years ago. Our US military predicted this. They said, fires raging on the West Coast. I know, I was at the hearing. Fires raging on the West Coast, sea levels rising and warmer seas, which leads to, of course, more flooding on the East Coast, and then weird weather events in the middle of the country, like tornadoes and flooding, like we just saw in Iowa over the past year. All of that has come true. And so you can't just pretend it's not happening. The answer is to upgrade our energy. And that's everything from the rules and regulations that had been put in place at the end of the Obama administration that sadly the Trump administration just left on the cutting room floor. We need to go back to those, reinstate those rules. And it means looking at car manufacturing, the things that California has been trying to do. And then it means seeing the green jobs that are in manufacturing that we're going to see out of this in this new economy. So I think it's really two-pronged. It's the energy and infrastructure that goes into manufacturing, seeing that in a different way, understanding, as Joe Biden has pointed out, we're not going to do it tomorrow, but we have that plan to get to zero emissions by 2040, 2050. And then the second piece of it is seeing what jobs are out there, and we know there are a lot in manufacturing. Because I've never been one to think, oh, if someone's job changes, you've got to expect them to go to school for 10 years and learn a new skill. Some of our mid-career workers aren't going to be able to do that. It's taking the skills they have, yeah, doing training for 6 months, a year, and having those jobs for them. And that's where green manufacturing comes in.
And could you talk a little bit about infrastructure and specifically the federal role in infrastructure? I think a lot of people, when Donald Trump came to office, a lot of people said, well, infrastructure is one of these places where, I mean, he's a builder that Democrats and Republicans could
Yeah, I was
get
one of
together.
those people. Go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
we've had many infrastructure weeks since then. What do you see that Joe Biden could do that Donald Trump couldn't?
I was one of those people. I kept interrupting you to say that because, of course, I did not want Donald Trump to win. I worked so hard for Hillary, but then you always try to think, okay, what are areas because Trump was in business that he might move on? And I even thought he might move on immigration reform, which is so important for our country's future, because he had employed immigrant workers and understood how important it was. But we saw the opposite. Same with infrastructure. So Joe Biden, I think we all know his stories about the train and his trips back and forth to Delaware, and the fact that he came out strong with an infrastructure package. And when I ran for president, it was actually the first thing that I put out there, because I see it as one way to connect the jobs that we need to have in this country and the future that we need to, in Joe's words, build back better. So that's going to mean things like rail, of course, and it's going to mean things like bridges and highways. No one knows that better than Minnesota, where the 35W bridge collapsed in the middle of a beautiful summer day, right 8 blocks from my house. But it's also going to mean things like broadband. And when we see this pandemic and the light it's cast on the problems with broadband in our country, it's unbelievable. And that also applies, by the way, to small manufacturing firms in rural parts of our country. If they're in a desert for broadband or even a desert for childcare or healthcare, we've got problems because they're not going to be able to keep going. And so I see this as all interconnected. History, FAST Act, something Mitch McConnell worked on with Barbara Boxer as one of the first Democrats to sign on. That helped plug in some federal money in the state basis. That needs to be, of course, not just re-up, but expanded on. And then a major infrastructure package is something that we need to see come our way. And I think a new president's got to do one because this president's had 4 years and he hasn't done it.
Well, Senator, Joe Biden has promised to add 5 million jobs on top of restoring the jobs that were lost in the pandemic. But I'd like to bring in here a question from a member of our audience, Steve Jewell Larson of Oregon. He says, I have personally watched billions of dollars of manufacturing capability moved out of the US due to uncompetitive corporate tax rates in the US. How do you see this trend reverse if we increase the corporate tax rate again? The increase in the corporate tax rate, of course, is a proposal that Vice President Biden has made. Is this really the right time to be raising taxes on corporations?
What Joe Biden has talked about doing is actually going back to the rates where they were when our country was doing really well, including doing better with manufacturing. Remember, if you go to 2019, pre-pandemic, we saw manufacturing output entering a recession in the summer of 2019. So I don't really see that $1 trillion tax cut helped when it came to a lot of our manufacturing in this country. And add to that something we haven't discussed, but the way the trade war and the way he conducted that trade war instead of having targeted tariffs, how it hurt manufacturing. I think those two things combined to create some major problems. I know this from at home. And so when Joe Biden comes in, what do we need to do? We need more consistency in our trade policy. So yes, we respond to things like illegal steel dumping from China, which is a major priority for me with the iron ore mines up in northern Minnesota. But you don't engage in full-scale trade wars. That hasn't worked. As for the tax code, what he is talking about is simply reversing the most regressive parts of those tax cuts, not all of them, and making them work. But that can go at the same time that you're investing in American manufacturing, which is things like tax credits for buying new equipment, something we used during the last downturn that the Obama administration put in, using that in a better and faster way. It's things like investing in research. It's things like printing up and having on a website what the federal contracts are doing when it comes to meeting the requirements for Made in America contracts. And some of them are things that our companies at home could be competing for. So it's just an all-out effort to increase American manufacturing. And there'll be disagreements on the tax code, that's for sure. But I think that what they did with the $1 trillion deficit they put us in was not the answer. And finally, I'd add one more thing when it comes to Pandemic Defense Production Act. That can be used and should be used, as Vice President Biden has advocated for, but it can be done in a smarter way. So you're working with companies and you say, okay, this is something we need to be done. We need you to switch over production. Here's the contract to do it in a much more positive way than this president used it. And I think it also will be helpful. Remember, we got to get a vaccine out next year. Oh, finally, last thing, something that I think when you talk to Jay Timmons of NAM, you're going to hear a lot about having a testing strategy in place, having the masks and things like that nationally. So that we can bring back our businesses on a more consistent basis.
So how soon do you think that, given everything else that will be on your plate in January, that you can move on some of these economic policies?
I think some of it depends on the outcome of this election. I think it's really important that we take back the U.S. Senate, and there's races all over the country that would lead you to believe that we're going to do that, even though the odds had been stacked against us. It's just going to make it more easy to quickly move on some of these economic issues. But I just think the first 100 days have to be devoted to all the things I just talked about with the pandemic, and then starting those building blocks to get the immigration bill done, which we must do, to move on climate change, and to get an infrastructure package done. And I think this can be done in a way that's going to be really positive for jobs, or I wouldn't be suggesting it.
Well, Senator Klobuchar, we absolutely swore to your staff that we would get you out of here at 20 minutes.
Out to the farm to see Tammy. No, it's all good. We're enjoying it. Do you have one last? I'm good. I'm good.
Well, and back to your road trip with Senator Baldwin. Yeah. I hope you have cheese curls in your near future there in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Cheese curds. Sorry.
Especially like them fried, but yes, very good.
Well, again, Senator Klobuchar, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope we see you again here at Post Live soon.
Well, I plan on coming back. Maybe not in a car, but I will return. All right. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much. We have much more of our program coming up. My colleague Heather Long will be back shortly with the CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers, as Senator Klobuchar promised, Jay Timmons. So please stay with us.
How does America take the next step back to the workplace with confidence? We've worked closely with businesses to find answers in technology. Technology that analyzes and secures work environments across multiple industries, helping to monitor building occupancy, improve air quality, and deliver real-time emergency notifications. Holistic solutions to give you and your employees greater peace of mind. So when the time is right to open safely, our technology is making the next step humanly possible.
I'm Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA, and joining me today is Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, Dr. Will Roper. Welcome, Will.
Barbara, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited about this subject, so I can't wait to hear your questions.
Well, earlier this summer, I had a chance to share with the Washington Post audience my thinking about how digital twins could be used to enhance preparedness, whether that's for natural disaster, for a pandemic, or even for future national security issues. But I know that you have been working toward digital twin technology for quite some time, and You, the Air Force, and Space Force have made this a foundational element of your plan for the future. Tell us what motivated you to get interested in digital twins.
It's one word, Barbara: speed. Our process right now is exceptionally slow. It's still born out of the Cold War during a time when technology was slow and difficult. And so when we had a breakthrough, we tended to go into mass production and buy things for a long period of time. But technology is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and we need to change with the times. Digital technology, especially digital twin technology, allows us to do things in the virtual world that we once had to do in the physical one. And that speeds everything up. It helps us to learn in a digital world where normally we had to build something, fly something, test something, and then come back to those engineers who originally designed the system to provide them the learning that they need to make improvements. Now, all of that can happen millions of times every night when we leave the office. So the power of digital technology is ultimately one of speed and agility. And during today's era where technology is ubiquitous and it's available to every adversary we have just as it is to us, speed and agility are going to be the only delineators for us on the future battlefield. And this is one way that we can start preparing for that future battlefield today in the laboratories and computing enclaves we have around the Air Force. So it's an exciting time to be in the business of designing an Air Force.
So the speed and agility of using the digital twin, many of us are familiar with manufacturing and actually design processes that begin with individual tools. So someone designs, someone else then engineers, and so on and so forth, all the way through the life cycle. But you've been talking about a digital thread. Why is it important to have a thread across the entire life cycle?
It's a great question, Barbara, and it's a term that you can use, but it actually means something very specific to us in the Air and Space Force. It's not a word, it's a set of technologies. It's important that we get them right. So a digital thread for us is a set of connected models that provide the authoritative source of truth about that system across its life cycle. Now, that's a lot of words to mean that the digital version of the model and the models that govern how we design it, assemble it, fly it, even maintain it, that those digital models are our source of truth. That means that if we make a change to design, or a change to how we assemble, or a change to how we sustain something, and we do that in the digital realm, that we can learn from that change, we can improve that change, and iterate without having to build something, bend metal. That's too slow to keep up with today's threats. The authoritative word, the fact it's an authoritative source of truth, that's easier said than done. That means that you have enough data to anchor those models to support that those digital renditions of what you're trying to learn really do count the same as their physical counterparts. So it very much depends on what kind of system it is. If it's an airplane like one we've built before, it's quite easy to get to a digital thread. If it's a new hypersonic weapon where we have very little data to anchor our results, we can start by building those connected models, but we need real world test data to anchor them. So there's no one size fits all, but the thing that you can see unifying our programs is trying to make the digital representation of our system the thing that is where most of our work occurs. And where we have to build a physical system, its job is to produce the data that gets us back in that digital world. So it's like the opposite of the movie The Matrix. We want to be superheroes in the digital world, but rather than wake up to the real world, we want most of our business to be done in the digital realm because it's faster and quicker. And if we're not the best at it in the world, we may face an opponent who is. So this is just as imperative as being dominant on the battlefield. Future battles will be won by first dominating in this digital design space.
So it's important that we all pick up this knowledge and get engaged with the technology. Will, I'm curious what steps we can be taking to help industry engage, and how can we bring the industrial space up to speed so that it's well prepared to support you and this vision you have for the future?
Where to begin? I mean, this is about changing everything about how we do business. This digital transformation really is like a new religion. It's not something you can just add in at the end. It's not a garnish that goes on the side of the plate. You're either all in on it or you're not. And that's what we're struggling with in the Defense Department, is that you have to adopt the full religion up front, or we're finding that once you're analog through and through. So there's quite a lot that we can do. The first is getting to a common reference architecture for how we digitally design and connect these digital threads together. That shouldn't be a mystery. That should be known. And we've produced our own digital threads inside the Air Force and Space Force. We're looking forward to sharing those reference architectures broadly. And we want to learn from companies like yours. Siemens is a leading innovator in digital technology, and we need to learn from you. You are driving this industry. We are simply applying it to our mission. The next thing we can do is help suppliers who currently provide parts for legacy-based acquisition and manufacturing approaches. We've got to get them and their tolerances up to snuff to meet this digital design paradigm. Tolerances are going to change. That we're seeing that across our programs. And finally, we've got to come to consensus about where physical world results are needed and where we can rely on digital ones. And that's going to change our risk posture. And we're an organization that has to take risk, but a lot of our risk occurs in the physical world. There's a pilot in the airplane that has to fly a different way, and we've trained that pilot to deal with the unknown. Well, in future, dealing with the unknown is going to happen inside our models. So how do we approach that, and how much do we want to put lives and missions on the line based on things that we were supposed to have done in a model rather than the physical world? And that's just going to take some thinking about how to balance risk versus reward safely. So there's no easy answer.
No easy answers, of course, but you can count on us. Siemens will be your partner side by side, step by step. Thank you so much, Will Roper, and we will now send it back to the Washington Post.
Thanks, Barbara.
We are continuing the discussion on manufacturing. I'm Heather Long, the economics correspondent at the Washington Post, and I'm joined now by Jay Timmons, the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. He's been in that role for almost a decade now, and he's one of the leading voices for America's more than 12 million manufacturing workers. Welcome, Jay. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Heather. Thanks for having me.
So let's start and get right to the heart of it. We are in the middle of a recession. We are in the middle of a pandemic. It's been very rough this year. The overall U.S. economy obviously took a big nosedive and is about half recovered, but there's a lot of warning signs that the recovery is stalling. How badly has the coronavirus hit manufacturing specifically, and where would you say we are in the manufacturing recovery?
Man, you just nailed 2020 on the head. It's time for it to just go away, I think. It has been quite a ride, and it's one that I don't think any of us would have ever have predicted. As you note, manufacturing took quite a direct hit during the pandemic. We ended up losing about 1.3 million jobs in the first few weeks. But our sector is beginning to recover. We've gotten back about half of those jobs. Production is up about 6% over the past few months. And we're starting to see steady gains. But I have to tell you, we obviously want it to be even stronger. And it's not just manufacturing, Heather. It's really the entire economy. We're all in this together. Manufacturing can't do it alone, even though it is a It is the strongest part of our economy, and for every job created in manufacturing, you create another 4 to 5 jobs in other sectors. But the problem that we have right now is the problem of uncertainty. Business is always cautious when there's uncertainty, and what we're seeing from our own surveys of our manufacturing members at the National Association of Manufacturers is not only uncertainty about the direction of the country policy-wise after the election, but also how seriously are the American people taking the pandemic, and how seriously are they taking precautions that would enable us to recover. We can't recover unless we get rid of this virus. That means, and Senator Klobuchar said I would talk about this, and she's exactly right. That means everybody wearing a mask when you're outside of your family bubble, so that we can save jobs, so that we can ensure that our schools open again, so that we can ensure that that the entire economy will come back, and of course save lives and stop the debilitating disabilities that occur because of COVID.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm looking forward to talking about that in just a minute. Let's stay on the economy just for a little bit longer. As you noted, there's still about almost 650,000 fewer manufacturing jobs today than there were a year ago. I know you think about those workers every day. How critical is it for the government to pass another stimulus bill right now? Are you worried about more layoffs if we don't have more stimulus?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the course of the last, what is it now, 7 months, you lose track of time during all of this. We've been very pleased that as part of our agenda, our American Renewal Agenda, we've been able to enact over 60 of our priorities. And a few of those priorities included, of course, the Paycheck Protection Act, the PPP lending program, the Main Street lending program. All of those were really essential in the early days of the pandemic for stabilizing stabilizing businesses in all sectors, not just manufacturing. The biggest thing that we need to see in a bill that frankly needs to get through quickly is an extension of the application period for the PPP program, because that's so essential for small businesses. 90% of the members of the National Association of Manufacturers are small and medium manufacturers that have very few, have a small number of employees, but those employees depend on that business's ability to continue to operate, to continue its doors being open. We need to have the application period extended. We also need to have the period for which the loans can be used extended past December 31st. This is not a 12-week pandemic. We know it's much longer. So we need to extend that. And then I would say the other thing that needs to happen is, and I'm going to be very specific about this, limited and targeted liability protection for businesses who are doing the right thing to protect their employees. We have, unfortunately, several cases or instances where jackpot justice lawyers would like to blame employers who have been trying to protect their employees for outbreaks of COVID, and we need to get that off the table. Now, look, I would be the first to say we could use comprehensive liability reform. That's not going to happen. That's not today. That is not politically possible. But what is possible is a very targeted liability reform effort that can protect employers who do the right thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was just a stunning statistic you just said, that 90% of your small manufacturing members had used the PPP program.
Sorry, that's a little off. 90% of our members are small and medium manufacturers.
Oh.
I don't know the exact statistic of who's used it, but I can tell you it's a large number who did use PPP.
Thank you. And can you just say again, what is your biggest worry if Congress and the White House don't reach a deal, or if they just do something for the airline industry that's very limited? Obviously, that wouldn't help many of your members. What do you foresee that could happen in the next few months without aid?
Sure. And look, this is difficult. Let's not let's not sugarcoat this. This is very difficult because we're not just talking about the manufacturing sector. That's what I represent, and obviously, I want to make sure that manufacturing has got all the tools necessary to recover. But it really does involve every industry. It involves the airlines. It involves schools. It involves the service industry and the hospitality industry. We've never experienced anything like this, and so this is vital to be able to produce the predictability, the certainty that American business needs in order to operate and to function, and to ensure that they don't have to make horrific decisions to lay off parts of their workforce. That was what the PPP program and the Main Street lending programs were all about, as well as some of those tax incentives that would be applicable for businesses that did not lay off employees. And so we need to make sure that we are all, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we're all united on the same idea that we have to provide certainty for American business and for the American worker.
I think another issue that's come up a lot when I talk to manufacturers is this issue of childcare. A lot of manufacturing workers are moms and dads, and they can't work from home generally. They need to go into their place of work, usually a factory or something along those lines. How big of an impact has it been on your sector to have so many schools virtual and childcares offline?
Yeah, well, it's a big issue for all Americans. I have two remote learners down in the basement right now from Chesterfield Elementary School, my local school, and then we have a preschooler who's also unfortunately lost his ability to go to preschool. So it is a very difficult issue for so many Americans. I am not one who says get the schools open. I think that has to be done very carefully, and communities are making those decisions on a case-by-case basis. In many areas where manufacturers are present, the schools have made the decision to continue with distance learning in an abundance of caution, and I think that's probably a very smart thing to do until we get this virus under control. That said, I've been also pretty proud of manufacturers who are doing what they do best, adapting and trying new things. So some of them are making hours a little bit more flexible for those who have children at home. So if there's two parents, one might be home when the kids are home and one might work later. They're also encouraging remote work where it's possible. And of course, it's not possible for most people on the production line. And so in those cases, a lot of manufacturers are trying to set up discrete childcare facilities with the proper safety protocols as well. It is a problem. It's a problem for all employers, there's no doubt.
Yeah. Jay, you just held up your mask. You and your team at the National Association of Manufacturers, you've been outspoken that to get this economy back, we need to take these precautions like social distancing and mask wearing. You all have a great campaign around mask wearing. I encourage people to check it out. I have to ask, obviously the president doesn't always wear his mask. How difficult is it, do you feel, to get this message out when some of our national leaders right now are not modeling mask wearing?
So I'm not the president of the United States, and I'm also not going to take the bait to get political here. But what I will say is I'm very, very proud, Heather, of business leaders who have been leading throughout this, who have been sending the right message. You mentioned our campaign. We are working overtime to try to get as many Americans as possible to do the right thing, to do the responsible thing, to protect their fellow Americans. This is not about. We all know this, right? This is it's almost passé at this point to repeat some of these talking points. We know what the science is. We know that science says that if you are science says if you're within 12 feet of somebody else that's outside of your family bubble, you need to wear a face covering. You need to wear, and Senator Klobuchar talked about a bridge between here and the time that we get the virus. Guess what? The bridge is made out of cloth. It's easy. Everybody can do this. And the sooner we do it, the sooner we get our economy back, the sooner we save jobs. I feel like a broken record, but it's so important to repeat the message. We don't need to do this to ourselves. We understand the science. We understand that this thing spreads. We've apparently known it since February, that this thing spreads just in the air. And it's more contagious than the flu. I think the flu maybe and deadly. The flu maybe kills 1 out of every 2,000 people it infects, and this kills 1 out of every 35 or something like that. I mean, it's a heck of a burden for the economy if we can't get this under control. We'll never get our schools open. And if we don't get it under control, we will have probably hundreds of thousands of more dead Americans. And look, when people are out doing, I was in Florida with my parents who are elderly, and I worry about them in a state that's completely opened up. I drove past a bar where everybody was out without masks and having a good time, and I'm glad they're having a good time. But my gosh, do it at a social distance, put on a mask, because you're killing other people. It's really that simple. And if you're contagious or you know that you've tested positive, quarantine for 14 days. We need contact tracing. We need all of these things if we're going to get the economy back and we're going to save Americans. It's really that simple.
You're pretty clear on where you stand there. I want to bring in one of our audience questions. We had several submitted, and many of them were on the topic of automation, which I know you've thought a lot about. Let me read one here from Candace Huang of California. Do you agree that one of the main reasons for permanent loss of manufacturing jobs in the United States is automation? And then a second one is similar from Joe Angie of Texas. Do you think COVID-19 will accelerate automation? We are seeing some forecasts like that from the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, and I'm wondering, how big of a risk do you think we're going to see more automation in the coming months?
I think those are great questions, and I don't agree with the premise. So let me back up and maybe try to unwind a few things. You had a question in the last segment, or the segment with Senator Klobuchar, from Steve Jewell Larson about corporate taxes. And I thought it was a brilliant question because we did see the erosion of manufacturing in the United States over the course of 20 years because of uncompetitive tax and regulatory policy in this country. And we had done several studies over the course of that period that showed that when you add the cost to a business, when you add those costs together, it was 35% more expensive to do business in the United States than anywhere else in the world after you took out the cost of labor. And that was basically taxes and regulations. So what you saw is investment happening in other areas of the world. Now look, over the course of the last few years, we've gotten a hold of our non-competitive tax rate. We are much more competitive now with a 21% corporate tax rate. We have regulatory certainty. That added a few years ago to manufacturers' optimism, and it added to investment. It added to the creation of jobs here in the United States. It added to additional wages and benefits. Now, COVID, of course, has reversed some of that. We already talked about that. But I think we can get back on that track. Now, specifically about automation, it's not taking jobs away. It's changing jobs. You had Barbara Humpton on here of Siemens, and I'm really proud. She's a member of our board of directors at the National Association of Manufacturers. And I think what she would tell you is that the nature of manufacturing, the type of jobs, are changing. They're changing from kind of those really intensive and rote jobs that we may have thought of as manufacturing in the past. And modern manufacturing really is about automation. It's about technology and robotics, but it's also about the people with the skills to be able to operate those types of automation. So when we talk about the fact that we're still down 650,000 jobs since the beginning of the pandemic in manufacturing, here's a really strange irony. We also have 460,000 jobs in manufacturing today that we can't fill. Now that's kind of odd, right? When you know you have all these jobs that we lost. Those 460,000 jobs have various skill sets that we simply can't find, which is why we have launched at the NAM our Creators Wanted campaign, and it's delayed because of the pandemic. But we're going to have, as soon as we get the vaccine and which will be manufactured, by the way, by a pharmaceutical manufacturer. When we have that and we get the economy back and we're able to come back together again, we're going to have a road show and go into communities all across this country to show young people what modern manufacturing is all about. We started Manufacturing Month just last week with Manufacturing Day. We usually open up thousands of facilities across the country to young people. We did that virtually this year to attract folks, and to attract young people and show teachers and educators what opportunities exist in manufacturing. And it really does revolve around automation, and it revolves around technology. We need more people, not less. We want more people. So I can assure you that it's not, technology is not costing jobs, it's actually enhancing jobs in manufacturing.
Thank you. I want to pick up on something, you brought in Senator Amy Klobuchar's remarks, and she was asked directly about Biden's Build Back Better plan, and specifically his suggestion to raise the corporate tax from 21 to 28%. And you heard her response. She sort of said that increase is needed to be more fair, but that it would be accompanied by more investment in the manufacturing sector. I'm wondering what your take is when you look at the Build Back Better plan from Joe Biden. What do you like and what do you think needs improvement?
Great question, Heather. And unfortunately, in a campaign or even after a campaign, so many proposals get boiled down to sound bites. And that happened with President Trump in 2016. And I will say that manufacturers have benefited greatly from, and I would say manufacturing workers in the United States have benefited greatly from the reduction of the corporate tax rate down to 21%. We actually argued for 15%. And I would still say to this day, if we want to be bold and aggressive, we should get that tax rate down to 15%. The other thing that we did in the tax reform legislation was we reduced the personal tax rate. And when we talked about those small and medium manufacturers previously, when you and I just did, we have to recognize that most small and medium-sized manufacturers file as S corporations or pass-through entities, and they pay the personal tax rate. Right now, that personal tax rate is actually higher than the corporate rate. We need to align those as well. And what I would say to Vice President Biden, and what I have said to Senator Klobuchar, we have lots of discussions on this issue, is first and foremost, thank you for recognizing the importance of manufacturing in America. Thank you for recognizing the importance of manufacturing to a strong economy overall and to more opportunities for Americans. I've been
found this on the web.
I'm sorry, we have a little technical issue there. Sorry about that. I've been pleased that they've talked about research and development, and Senator Klobuchar mentioned that. She talked about investment in equipment and capital costs. That's good too. But if we go to 28%, and I'd be happy to have this discussion with the Biden campaign, if we go to 28%, when you add on the average state and local taxes, we'd actually be the highest corporate tax rate in the world again. That does not make us competitive. So I'm sure, and that's why I say I don't want this to be boiled down to a soundbite, because I'm sure there are provisions that he has within that. It's not just a straight increase, I would hope. But we want to make sure that we can show him the data from the tax cut in 2017. We launched a campaign called Keeping Our Promises. We have collected data that shows how much additional investment in America has occurred, how many jobs we've created in manufacturing. I think in that first year, there was 267 jobs created right in that first year after tax reform, and also the increase in wages and benefits. So we have good stories to tell, and we'll tell those stories. If folks want to talk about raising the corporate tax rate, we don't want anything that will punish manufacturers' ability to invest and hire in this country.
Our time is short, but I just want to get one last one in if we can. And that's, you've praised President Trump's tax cuts. But lately, you've been a little bit critical of some of his immigration policies, such as the H-1B visa reforms on some of the high-skilled workers coming into the U.S. What do you wish President Trump would do differently around immigration?
Well, so first of all, the National Association of Manufacturers and manufacturing overall is about policy, right? It's not about politics. It's not about personality. It's not about process. If we got mired down in those last three, we'd never get anything done. So for us, it's about policy that makes America more competitive. We talked about tax reform. We talked about regulatory certainty. Those have been good for manufacturing. I can also tell you that trade deals that help us reach those 95% of customers that live outside of the United States, that's important as well. Infrastructure, which was also part of the last segment, is critical. But on immigration is so much a part of the fiber of this country that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We've produced a plan called A Way Forward, and it covers every single facet of immigration and makes sure that we can have a system that we can all be proud of. And if we think back about 50 years ago, something touched me this week that I want to share with you. A fellow by the name of Juan Romero was quite a famous Mexican immigrant. At age 17, he held the dying body of Robert F. Kennedy after Kennedy was shot. And the last thing he said was, "It's going to be okay." Mr. Romero actually just died this week. He was 68 years old. And I think it's really important to kind of remember who we are. What is our DNA in this country? And our DNA is all about immigration. It's all about bringing people together to strengthen the fabric of this society. You mentioned H-1B. That's a very discrete issue. We've sued the administration because we think it was very improperly applied, because it's going to hinder our ability to do business and to recognize that we live in a global economy. We want to fix that very discrete issue, but we want to fix immigration overall.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate you sharing Mr. Romero's story, a great remembrance of him this week. Thank you to all for watching, and especially to Jay Timmons for joining us for this important discussion on manufacturing. You can tune in again on Tuesday at 10:30 for a special conversation with the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, Wes Moore. Next week has a great lineup on Post Live, including a discussion about voter turnout on Friday. You can find it all at WashingtonPostLive.com to register and see the full schedule. Thank you.